Good evening and welcome to the first in a series of live debates here on PLG-TV 13. I'm Matthew Fogel, along with the editor of the Kentucky Standard, Forrest Berkshire, and Kentucky Standard reporter, Randy Patrick. We're live from the Nelson County Civic Center on South 3rd Street in Bardstown. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our debate this evening features the two candidates in the race for Kentucky State Representative in the 50th District, a race that will be decided on General Election Day, Tuesday, November the 8th. We welcome to the stage Republican Chad McCoy and Democrat James DeWeese.
Thank you.
The 50th District of Kentucky represents constituents exclusively in Nelson County. The order of speaking tonight is based on a coin toss done a few minutes ago. And the winner of that coin toss was Chad McCoy, who selected to go second for his opening statements. So we'll now get a 2-minute opening statements from Mr. James DeWeese.
Thank you. I thank everybody for watching tonight, and as long as the folks who had come out to watch this evening here live. My name's James DeWeese. I'm a union representative for Teamsters Local 89, but I'd like to start out by asking the community to continue your support for the Jim Beam Workers 111D, and hopefully with your thoughts and prayers that they can find a settlement on their contract, one that works. A little bit about me: I have a beautiful wife that's here in the audience, and we have 2 children. I have a 3-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter. I started off my career at UPS at 18 years old, became a driver out here in Nelson County at 23, and I have moved on to work for the Teamsters, in which I represent the UPS employees for the Teamsters Local 89. I've been a strong advocate for working families my entire life, and I've worked hard to make sure that their rights are upheld. As your state representative, I'll be a strong advocate for you in Nelson County. I've been a leader in the workforce, and I will be a leader for you. Thank you.
All right, and now we'll have 2 minutes from Chad McCoy.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you all, everybody that's here, and those of you watching at home. I appreciate this opportunity to take just 2 minutes and let you know a little bit about myself. First of all, my name is Chad McCoy. I'm the Republican candidate for state rep here for the 50th District. Some of you, probably a lot of you, know me by the other title I get called probably more often than Chad McCoy, which is Dr. Holly McCoy's husband. And I get that a lot. I've been married to Holly now for 23 years. Unfortunately, she's stuck at work tonight, and I think I can't be here. That's what happens when you're a small town doc. Holly and I have 2 boys. They're twins. They're juniors in high school here in Nelson County. I originally am from Carter County. I grew up in eastern Kentucky. For those of you that don't know Carter County, it's the McDonald's between Moorhead and Ashland, right on I-64. Actually worked at that McDonald's for all of my high school career. Went off to college in Virginia, had these grand aspirations of being an aerospace engineer. Wasn't nearly smart enough to do that, but I did continue my food service career at Taco Bell while I was there. Came back home to Kentucky to go to law school, graduated from UK Law School in '95, so I've been an attorney for 21 years now. For my wife's residency, we had to leave Kentucky after a little bit, and we ended up moving to Utah. But in 2004, she and I kind of really, at the end of her residency, put our heads together and said, you know what, we want to live in Kentucky again. We want to raise our kids in a small town. And so we moved back in 2004. And since that time, I've been a small business owner, owned my own practice the entire time. And just a couple things for voters out there that may not know this. This is something you can sort of write in stone about me. I am pro-life. I'm a pro-life Catholic. I am the only candidate up here that's been endorsed by the Kentucky Right to Life PAC. And in addition, I'm pro-gun. I'm a life member of the NRA, and I have an A rating from the NRA. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. And now we'll move on to questions. For answers, we will allot 3 minutes per candidate, and we will also have rebuttals from each candidate as well, if you so wish to choose to do so. And for the first question tonight, we will get it from a Kentucky Standard reporter, Randy Patrick.
Thank you. A recent mailer by Americans for Prosperity Kentucky said that Mr. McCoy is in favor of abolishing the state income tax. The state income tax is a major source of revenue for the state. Our question is, Mr. McCoy, are you in favor of abolishing the state income tax? And if so, how would you propose making up the revenue it generates?
So back up and look at our state for a minute, okay? Kentucky is absolutely positioned wonderfully geographically. We're in the middle half of the eastern seaboard. We have two major north-south interstates. We've got one major east-west interstate. We've got railroads. We've got an incredibly talented workforce, and we've got this river that runs over the top. We should be an economic powerhouse in this region, and we're not. We get our butts kicked by our neighbors to the north in Indiana and by our neighbors to the south in Tennessee. And so you got to back up and say, okay, why? Why is that happening? Well, one of the major reasons, I think, Randy, is our tax code. Hasn't been reformed since the 1970s. It's antiquated, it's out of date, and it's not helping us, it's hurting us, especially with economics in the region. So what's getting ready to happen? Governor Bevin has brought in all kinds of folks to look at our current tax code. And we're probably not going to hear anything until after the election, but what we're going to see out of the governor's office is a lot of proposals to look at what I hope, number one, widening the tax base, lowering the tax rates, especially the corporate tax rates, so that we can make Kentucky an economically competitive environment. You know, that's what we've got to have in this state if we want to keep growth going. So, you know, the Americans for Prosperity, they ask a million things, they pull one comment out of there. No, you can't abolish the state income tax. That's not something you're going to come in and do with a swipe of a pen. Do I think it needs to be lowered? Absolutely.
Okay, and I was going to ask Mr. DeWeese about his position on the same issue.
Well, when it comes to tax reform, I would support tax reform, any type of tax reform that doesn't hurt working families and also keeps jobs coming into our state. You know, when it comes to taxes, taxes is the #1 expense that working families have. So I would always advocate for any type of tax reform that would help working families.
All right, we'll go on to the next question now, and we have a Kentucky Standard editor, Forrest Berkshire.
The same mailer that Randy was just talking about claimed that Mr. McCoy opposes raising the gas tax. Currently, legislators seldom have to vote on the gas tax because it is tied to the wholesale price of fuel and goes up or down accordingly. Would either of you change this system? And how would the state ensure that it has adequate funding to maintain the quality of our roads? And for this, Mr. DeWeese will go first.
Well, I'd be open to look at any type of tax reform that would help our road system, so long as it doesn't affect our roads. But do I see it moving away from the gasoline? At this time, I don't. I haven't heard of any talk of it. Yeah, our roads are very important, particularly in rural areas. And I feel that folks in Nelson County, in rural Nelson County, deserves, you know, a hard surface to drive on. Yeah.
Mr. McCoy?
I don't think we need to change it. I do understand the problem when we get into a time like this when the price of crude oil drops so low, you know, we're not making much money on that gas tax. And that's something that I think the legislature is going to have to look at. Are there other, and I've heard some folks say, pay for use type of things. And I think we see that in Jefferson County with the building of the bridges as another way to bring in revenue for the people that are going to have whatever that project is going to be. But, you know, really when we go back and look at roads, the transportation in fixing the roads and bringing roads in, infrastructure is absolutely key to keep our economic development going. And I think one of the things we're going to have to really focus on is this P3, this public-private partnership kind of concept. As we get more and more factories into Nelson County, which is great that we're doing, that's something I hope we're able to look at when we get to the legislature.
All right, rebuttal?
I'd like to rebut with that as well. You know, I think we both agree that infrastructure in this county is essential with the factories that we have coming in and the growth that you've seen, that we have seen here in Nelson County. I wouldn't necessarily advocate for any kind of pay for usage. You know, when we look at the bridge situation that we have there in Louisville, you know, that affects working folks quite a bit. And you know, I see people not wanting or looking to even quit their jobs because of the tolls.
All right, we'll go on to the next question, and we'll have Mr. McCoy answer this one first.
Okay.
Both of you have said that you are pro-life. While the Supreme Court has ruled that a woman has a right to choose and state government cannot outlaw abortion, what can state government do to reduce the number of abortions performed in Kentucky?
there's a lot we can do. And if you look at what other states, so back up here a minute, Matthew. Ultimately, it's the U.S. Supreme Court that's going to be setting what are the limits and the levels of what we can do here in the state. So Texas has tried a lot of things, and some of it passes, some of it doesn't. And I think we need to watch them and see how the other states do it and what they get away with. The things that I like, that I'm in favor of, and I can't believe I can't remember the name of the organization, but there's a not-for-profit group that will bring a young woman in from the very beginning and say, look, you got a lot of options here. Number one, we're going to help you with all the maternal needs, all the maternal medical care throughout the baby's life and your pregnancy. And then they bring in the ultrasound equipment right out of the gate. And there's something about, I don't know if you've had this opportunity in your life yet, but when you get to look there and see your baby, and in my case there were 2 in there, that's a monumental thing. That is hard to look at. And since there are so many options, I think the government needs to try everything we can to get these young women into those places so that they have the opportunity to know what resources are there to help them and get a look at that baby.
All right, Mr. DeWeese.
I agree with my opponent on this situation. My wife comes from a very good Catholic home, and I come from a very good Christian home. And being pro-life is something that's a part of our family. Talking with a lot of folks, though, a lot of women who have had abortions, they regret this. They regret this action later on in life. They feel that when they were pregnant, that they had no one to turn to, no one to talk to. They couldn't talk to their family. They couldn't talk to their minister or their pastor or their priest. So they feel all alone and they rush to a quick decision. I'm for anything that will give these women the resources to be able to help them to understand where they're at and what options that they have, because there's a lot of other options besides abortion, adoption, and having the baby. So.
All right, thank you both. And for the next question, we'll go to Kentucky Standard reporter Randy Patrick.
Both of you have also voiced support for the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. But what is your position on gun control laws? In the last legislative session, a bill was filed to allow carrying concealed deadly weapons without a permit. Do you support such legislation? Also, do you support the ban on people convicted of domestic violence to obtain a concealed carry permit?
Mr. DeWeese, go first.
Well, anytime there's gun legislation, this is where people fear. They fear that any laws that are enacted on gun legislation is going to create a slippery slope as to, where will it end? My wife carries a gun. We believe in carrying guns in our family. We have a lot of guns, and I'm going to support the Second Amendment completely.
Mr. McCoy.
Thank you. I grew up, like I said, in eastern Kentucky, and my grandfather tells the story of literally taking his gun to school. And all the kids would squirrel hunt on the way to school, squirrel hunt on the way back out of Evermans Creek, and they would pile their guns in the corner. That's how I grew up. Guns have always been a part of my life, and I'm absolutely going to fight to protect that right. And probably, I don't have a problem with people having concealed carry. To me, guns aren't the problem. Now, when we get into the domestic abuse situation, I do get to spend some time Wednesday mornings in EPO court, and there are situations where, at least temporarily, maybe there's some folks out there that don't need to have a gun. So that's something I would be willing to look at, whether or not someone who's been convicted of being a domestic abuser ought to have an unfettered right for a concealed carry. And I think the way the law is right now, they can't have a firearm at all, regardless of whether it's a concealed carry.
All right, this next question is for Mr. McCoy. Your views on tort reform differ from the usual position of the Republican Party. Could you please, for our audience, explain your position on tort reform, and also any other ways you may differ from the sort of the standard GOP positions? And Mr. DeWeese, when you go second, can you name one or more issues where you differ in general from the Democratic Party as a whole?
Yes.
So for me, tort reform, I know I'm pigeonholed as somebody that's different than the GOP, but I will tell you, as I've told them, they're the ones that are wrong, not me. And the reason I say that is when you go back and you look at the history of our country, Okay, so go all the way back to England. You know, why in the world did we end up over here? We ended up over here because of the way the government was being run in Europe. And our founding fathers, starting back with the Declaration of Independence, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, expressly in there, it says one of the major things we have to do is protect the right to a jury trial. Then you get to the Federalist Papers. As they're going back and forth trying to develop our Constitution, the Federalist Papers talk all about how important it is to have a jury trial, a jury of your peers, to stop the tyranny of government. Then you get to the actual Constitution itself. The 10 Amendments, right? The Bill of Rights. Everybody knows them, and everybody can tell you what number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Number 7, the right to a jury trial. So I don't understand how the Conservative Party, the party of limited government, can say, well, we're for limited government for all constitutional rights except number 7. What's really happening there is you've got a power grab going on by the insurance companies with a campaign of misinformation. They're trying to convince people there's a problem that there's not, and the way to solve it is to add extra layers of government regulation. So when you sit down and actually look at it, it is the conservative position. That is, it is the limited government position. So I'm very much against any sort of reforms on our right to bear arms, our right to free speech, our right to remain silent, our right to have an attorney, our right to have free of search and seizure, and the same would go for the jury trial. I just don't understand why people sort of ignore it.
Mr. DeWeese.
I think one issue that I'm very different with some of the people in my party is abortion. And, you know, me and my wife had faced this issue years ago with the birth of my son. We had the doctor come in and talk about my son and the chances of his survival. He had a heavily damaged umbilical cord. The doctor had told us that the chance of him living is going to be very slim, and if he did survive, he probably wouldn't have a long life, and he was going to be heavily deformed. Of course, me and my wife, the way we grew up, we could not accept that. So, you know, we walked outside, we prayed to God. Well, first we told the doctor that we're going to take whatever God gives us, and we're going to love him. We walked outside, we prayed to God, and we took action. And I have a perfectly healthy child. And that is where I stand with an abortion. And as your state representative, I will fight for every child in the womb, for good jobs for them, all the way to the grave. And that's where I stand, and that's where I differ from my party. Thank you.
All right, we'll have Mr. DeWeese go first on this next question. Some economic development leaders say that enacting a right-to-work law and repealing the prevailing wage law would boost business in Kentucky. What is your position on these two labor issues and why?
I am 100% against right-to-work laws. All they do is destroy paychecks of workers by weakening the contracts. You know, these contracts and these union members, just like the folks there at Jim Beam, they set the bar for our community, for our non-union workers. And all this law is to weaken the contracts, lower the bar across the community. When you look at other communities that have right to work, you see stark differences in wages and benefits. Kentucky cannot afford right-to-work laws, nor can Nelson County, and I'm going to stand strong against it for the working families. Along with prevailing wage laws, the repeal of prevailing wage, all it does is cut the paychecks of construction workers. And that's it. Thank you.
Mr. McCoy.
Thank you. I have absolutely nothing against unions. My grandmother, my mother's dad, worked for Fisher Body, stamped out auto parts his whole life, was in the union, been to the union picnic, got to know everybody in the union. In college, I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship with Ashland Oil, and I worked at the oil refinery right there on the border of Kentucky and West Virginia. All my buddies were in Union Boiler. Everybody was in the union. Got to know those guys well. In my career, I represent hundreds of union workers in this town, constantly. And what I've learned is they're smart, they're hardworking, they're capable people. So what I don't understand is, why don't they have the same choice, the same right that everybody else has? So take somebody that hires me for a minute. I'm representing you. That's my job, and I'm going to do a good job for you. But if you don't like me, you can fire me. It's in my contract. It's the very last paragraph. I go over it with everybody. If I'm not doing a good job, fire me. Union workers ought to have that ability. They ought to be able to choose for themselves whether or not they want to join the union. And what that'll do is that'll make unions have to work hard for their workers. And look, there are some unions that are great, that do a great job. But then there are other unions that really don't do that good of a job. I have a lot of people come talk to me. They'll bring up a problem, and I'll say, well, have you gone to your union steward? Yes. They won't do anything. And we get that over and over and over again. Now, I'm not saying that's everywhere, but that happens. So as a fairness standpoint, I think they ought to have the same right that every other worker has, and that is let them choose what they want to join. Don't let the government make that choice for them. With respect to prevailing wage, as a legislature, I would be a steward of the public money. And I don't understand why we would automatically choose to spend more money and not take the best bid, the best value, the best option that we have. So I would be against prevailing wage.
30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, I'd like to rebut both of those issues there. In terms of the prevailing wage, this was repealed in Ohio back in the mid-90s, and they found no reduction in no savings whatsoever. The only reductions was in the paychecks of the construction workers. In respect to the right to work, though, this is where me and my opponent differ on a lot of things, is when you go into contract negotiations and you have 25-30% of the members who do not pay dues, you've already lost your leverage. Let's take in case the Jim Beam strike that we have out here in Claremont and in Boston with a lot of our folks here in Nelson County. They would not have that strike today because these striking workers who don't pay dues wouldn't be striking workers because they would not have the strike benefits, and the company would already have them inside their working. So,
just real quick, one other thing that I forgot to address, the concept that somehow changing the right to work is going to hurt wages. I'd encourage people to look to that yourself. The wages are higher in northern states, not because there's unions or not unions, just because they're higher because of cost of living. And some of the numbers I've seen thrown around by opponents of right to work have not taken into account actual cost of living. So I got in touch with the Kentucky Association for Economic Development, and if we look at just our neighbor to the north, Indiana, the average weekly wage in Indiana is $797. In Kentucky, it's $744. That's a $43 difference, and they are a right-to-work state. So I don't know that we can just blanketly say wages would be lower if right-to-work happened.
All right, thank you both. And for the next question, Mr. McCoy will answer first.
Okay.
Are you in favor of increasing the minimum wage? And if so, why? And if so, by how much?
The minimum wage, if you back up and look at the state level, and remember that's what I'm running for here is a state level position. In 2007, House Bill 305, in what has got to be a record of bipartisanship, was that both the Democrats and the Republicans at both the Senate and the House got together and passed by 33-1 in the Senate and 93-5 in the House, passed a bill making sure that our minimum wage was going to go up as the federal minimum wage did. It's locked in. So I don't know that it's really an issue we need to worry about. But what I'd really like to focus on, though, is the fact that it is and should be a local issue. We don't need to be relying on the federal government or even the state government. Look at Jefferson County and Fayette County. They've already raised their minimum wage. So I think we ought to pull that issue back here locally and let our local leaders figure it out.
Mr. DeWeese.
Yeah, I support the raising of the minimum wage. I think that any work should have the dignity to it, and people should be able to provide a good living for their family. Our minimum wage has been stagnated for a very long time in this state, and I just think it's awful to think that some place would pay starvation wages to somebody, and that is something I'm very passionate about. So as to what it should be, I think that's what legislators would decide, but it should be livable. Thank you.
And now this next question will go to Mr. DeWeese.
Mm-hmm.
The House passed a statewide smoking ban in public places in 2014, but it got nowhere in the Senate. And Governor Bevin's election in 2015 took that issue off the table. Kentucky has the highest adult smoking rate in the nation at 26%. And if it were to cut its smoking rate to the national average, which is 18%, A study by UC San Francisco estimated it could save $1.7 billion in healthcare costs the very next year. Studies have shown that smoking bans reduce smoking. Would you support a statewide smoking ban? And whether you would or would not, please explain your reasoning behind it.
Sure. My wife's over there smiling about it. You know, I've never smoked a cigarette in my life, and whenever I'm around cigarette smoke, people who know me, it just absolutely chokes me up. Even just a small whiff of it, it's something I personally cannot stand. But I look at this, you know, in public places, let's say a bank or a government center or something like that, or even a grocery store, you know, I wouldn't want smoking to be there. But, you know, in certain small businesses of like a bar or a restaurant, if the owner chooses, I think it should be his choice. You know, I'll choose not to go there. And when there are places that allow smoking heavily, I choose not to go there, and I'll vote my dollar somewhere else. And that's my position on that.
Mr. McCoy.
I would not support a statewide smoking ban, and for the very reason that this is an individual liberty and a local government sort of thing. If you run a business, I think it's good business not to allow smoking in your business. You're going to get me, sounds like you're going to get Mr. DeWeese. We would choose to vote our dollars in that way, and I think that's the right way to handle it. I don't think the government needs to be telling people what they can do and what they can't do.
All right, we'll stay with Mr. McCoy on this next question. We're going to stay with the issue of public health. Kentucky has one of the lowest cigarette taxes in the country at 60 cents per pack. Should the cigarette tax be raised, and if so, by how much? If it is raised, what should that money be used for? Should the state spend more on smoking cessation?
You know, it's a good question. I'll be honest with you. I don't have a lot of information on the public health effects of it, or what they even use the money for now. When you look at people who smoke, generally it's a lower socioeconomic community, so I can see that being a higher percentage of their wages. I would want to see through what the impacts would be. What's more important to me, though, is that we're not allowing government assistance to be used for smoking. The health consequences are obviously devastating, and the impact on healthcare in general is devastating. My wife preaches to every patient she has, stop, stop, stop. You know, so smoking cessation, I don't know that the government needs to be spending any more money on it, but the insurance companies sure are and ought to continue with that. And one thing they can really help is with information and pamphlets that go through your primary care physicians to get out to the folks.
Mr. DeWeese.
Well, I don't know the health impact or the impacts to health either, but in terms of sin taxes, I'm not for sin taxes. So.
All right, we'll go to this next question, and Mr. DeWeese will answer this one first.
Okay.
Mr. DeWeese, what can Kentucky do to fight the heroin epidemic, and specifically, what should the legislature do?
Well, you know, I think for one, we need to continue to separate, or really start to separate more of the victims versus the people who peddle the drugs. Now, in terms of having some minimum mandatory sentencing, that's on a federal issue. But the victims, there are a lot of things that we can do in the state legislature. One is provide funding for these drug courts. These drug courts work. For every dollar that is spent in drug court, it saves $4 in the courts. And these drug courts have the effective rate of it is about 60 to 70%. So I think that we need to put a lot of emphasis on drug courts. In addition to that, our local police and our local drug task force, we need to make sure that they have the technology and the resources to combat the drug epidemic. To me, I think, in my opinion, and what I've seen in the community and talking to the community, that the drug epidemic is probably one of our #1 issues that we need to deal with. And I deal with young people entering the workforce with my job, and the drug epidemic with them is so bad. It is so awful that, you know, we need to act quickly. We are losing a generation, and it's in everyone's family. So you know, those are the things that I think would be necessary, that we need to get on the ball with in helping with this issue.
Mr. McCoy.
Thank you. You know, I unfortunately, I think I deal with this every day. I had 2 people in my office today that had relapsed on drugs, and it's something that Holly and I talk a lot about. And if you really back up and look, you know, the legislature, through I think what were good intentions a few years ago, passed that pill bill. And what that pill bill did was criminalized doctors trying to help folks and give them pain pills, which then put people out on the streets where the opiates are not necessarily controlled. And it's something that you've got to almost get your head around it, and it's tough because you don't ever want to appear to be soft on crime or anything, but when we're talking about an opiate addiction, we're talking about the single most addictive substance human beings have ever made. And it doesn't matter what family you're in, how much money you have or don't have, or where you live, this is impacting everybody. And once you're addicted, it becomes what doctors will call a compulsory behavior. That is, no amount of increasing consequence is going to stop the behavior. People are still going to do what they have to do to get these drugs. So the answer is, unfortunately, this sort of multidisciplinary approach to it, where you've actually got the carrot and the stick, you know, the criminal justice system, but you've also got to have a medical component in there from a physical medicine standpoint, and you've got to have a mental health component in there, and you've got to have a family component in there. You know, people have to be able to deal with the addicts and understand they're going to relapse. That doesn't mean that it's a lost cause. So the government's role in all that is what's going to be tough to figure out. And one of the big problems we've had with the budget shortfall, and I'm sure you guys are going to get to the pension question in a minute, but the pension is creating a problem for us because we've criminalized this addiction so far. You know, we have very tough laws on people who traffic in different drugs, and we stick them in jail for a long time, but now all of a sudden we're having to let them all back out. And we're letting them back out because we don't have the money to keep them in jail, and so we don't know what else to do with them. And if you're not in this business, you may not have paid attention to it, but right now, if you're a nonviolent first offender of even trafficking, you might get a 3-year jail sentence, but you'll be paroled out in a couple, 3 months. So what happens then? Well, you're right back on the street with your addiction. So we've got to figure out another thing to do rather than sticking them in jail, something that's more comprehensive. Maybe shift those jail dollars from the punishment side to something a little bit bigger that would help them fight this problem.
All right, thank you all. And for the next question, we'll have Mr. McCoy answer first.
Governor Matt Bevin has taken steps to repeal and replace Connect and the Medicaid expansion. What should the legislature do to make sure that those 500,000 formerly uninsured Kentuckians who now have insurance don't lose it? And what other changes should be made?
So, first of all, keep this in mind. All that's really happening is the manner with which people get Obamacare has changed. Not the number of people that are going to get it. Nobody's going to be without insurance. Nobody's going to be, left out in the cold. So what we need to do, and what they are doing, if you go there and look, is we really got to educate the folks that used to go through Kentucky Connect as their portal to now go through the federal portal to get to the same insurance. But back up, there's a massive problem, and that is, this whole Obamacare thing isn't working. Whether you're for it or against it, the simple reality is when you've only got one provider of insurance in a county, there's no competition there, there's no incentive there, and that's not how this thing was designed to work. Kentucky, unfortunately, we're looking at over 40% of the counties with only one possible provider. And one of those, in those other counties where there's more than one, the providers are pulling out. So something has to be done, and it's going to have to be done probably at a federal level, but the states are going to be stuck grappling with this as well. I'm very much in favor in market-based incentives as much as we can figure out how to do it, but you've got a problem with health care, and that problem is that it is what's called inelastic demand. It's not like a pair of blue jeans where I'm willing to pay less for my 50th pair. If my arm's broken, my arm's broken. I need to get it fixed. I'm going to pay whatever it takes. And so that economic problem there of inelastic demand sort of makes government regulation of health care a tough issue. But it's one we're going to be dealing with. But I don't want anybody to be, sometimes, no offense to you three, you're in the media, love you guys, but I sometimes feel like there's a spin put on getting rid of Kentucky Connect. It's not leaving anybody out in the cold. And quite frankly, what the governor's done, if you remember right when Obamacare came out, we did this Medicare expansion. So what we did is we pulled a lot of folks that weren't on Medicare, pulled them into the Medicare system. What he's doing right now, this new program rolling out, is trying to get those people to buy in and take a little personal responsibility. So that means some of them have now $1 they have to pay to get their health insurance. Some of them it's up to $15. But along the way, there are incentives that take it back to free again. Incentives like if you'll go work at your church, or work at the dog pound, or go do community service at the soup kitchen. Anything you can to show that you're kicking in a little effort there, we'll go back to giving you the free service. And that's a model that personally I like. I want to make sure we, as in the government, we help everybody we can, but at the same time, I want it to be a hand up, not a hand out. And having them sort of pitch in, I think that's a great way to do it.
Mr. DeWeese.
With the changes, this is where we're going to disagree as well. With the changes of the Kentucky Connect, it is going to leave people out in the cold. And from what I've read, it's going to leave close to 1,000 people out in the cold here in Nelson County. In addition to that, expecting somebody to have skin in the game, if you will, do some community service for the tooth that you need to be pulled out. These are our most vulnerable people. These are people that's very poor. And there's no way I would support that whatsoever. But talking to folks out in Nelson County at the doors, affordable health care is the #1 issue that they talk to me about. People are absolutely devastated. They're worried about it. And I am committed to doing whatever I can as your state representative with affordable health care to make sure that you have the access that you need. Thank you.
I just want to follow up on one point,
Mr.
if I
McCoy.
can. The skin in the game part, just so everybody understands, that is only for able-bodied working people. That has nothing to do with folks that are unable to work for whatever reason, whether it be mental or physical. So we're not talking about people that can't put forth a little effort.
All right, thank you both. And for this next question, we'll have Mr. DeWeese go first. It's a little bit broader of a question than some of our specific questions. What else should the state do to improve economic development?
Well, I know in this county what my plan is to gather the stakeholders and the public officials and us all work together as a team. And combined with the legislature, come up with plans that's necessary for us to bring the jobs in and good paying jobs into our county and keep our economy strong here in our county and our state.
Mr. McCoy?
Thank you. In the legislature, our job, we're not the guys out there, guys and gals, that are trying to bring a particular industry in. That's Kim Houston's job. My job in the legislature would be to make Kentucky and Nelson County in particular the most economically friendly environment I can. We got to have a good climate here for job growth to come in. So I talked earlier about the changes I would want to make to the tax code. To me, that's #1. #2, again, whether you're for it or against it, when you talk to folks that are looking at bringing jobs in, you will hear them say, we'd rather go to Indiana because it's a right-to-work state. So the right-to-work issue comes up there as well. #3, in my mind, is the infrastructure. One of the things that I think we're really lacking out here, when I say out here, I mean Nelson County, is high-speed internet. So many businesses today are absolutely dependent upon, and I don't mean to plug Google, but Google Fiber, something that's 100 gigabytes a second. If we don't have that, we're not even in the game when these guys are looking for where are we going to build our next factory, where are we going to go for those good paying jobs. We've got the people, they're skilled, we could do it, but I don't think the government's kept up with the infrastructure. So those are the 3 things I would do.
Okay. Mr. DeWeese, 30 seconds.
I agree with the infrastructure and also the high-speed internet. Those are things that not only brings factory jobs, but also white-collar jobs as well. But in terms of what my opponent said about right to work, we hear this all the time, and the argument never comes out to be that. Just like when the Beretta factory was looking here, and that same claim was made when they were called. Right to work was not the issue of why they didn't come here, and that seems to be the issue with a lot of companies. It's never right to work. It's usually something else.
All right, thank you both. Mr. McCoy, you answer this one first.
Okay.
Overregulation is often blamed for inhibiting economic growth, and the Environmental Protection Agency is often cited as an example of that. Do you believe that environmental regulations should be relaxed or any of them even repealed? And are there other regulations as well that you think should be reduced?
Yeah, Randy, the list of regulations that need to be stricken off the books is probably too long for us to sit here and go through. The governor right now is having his Cut the Red Tape program, which I'm anxious to see everything that gets thrown up there. But let me make sure people understand what's happened in the United States during the last 8 years. And this is a little more federal than local, but it's going to end up being local. The Obama administration has, through a series of executive orders, just fundamentally changed the breadth and reach of our Constitution. There's a little clause in the Constitution that says all navigable waterways are quote-unquote waters of the United States, which means the federal government has exclusive jurisdiction to regulate them. Well, what's a navigable waterway? I mean, it's common sense, right? And that's something that I think happens is we forget common sense. A navigable waterway is one that I can navigate. I can take a boat on it. I can get from point A to point B. Obama's decided that a navigable waterway includes that ditch in my yard, the one that runs down by my horse barn. So now, all the federal regulation that the EPA wants to just shove down our throats is now here in our laps locally. And what it's done is it's absolutely killing our local farmers. It's changed everything they can do. It changes how many cattle and where they can put their cattle, because they can't get them near those ditches anymore because it's a navigable waterway. So the federal government overreach, the environmental regulation, we absolutely have to do something about it. But don't misread me, Randy. I'm not saying I'm for a polluted environment or anything like that. What I think really needs to happen here, and it's a phrase you'll hear me preach and beat like a drum, is voting with your dollars. We, the consumers, we have to explain to companies that this is important to us, that we want you to do these environmentally good things, and then we have to put our money where our mouth is. And if that means bypassing the big box store to go to a local store to buy something and maybe paying an extra buck for it, then we need to do that, because that's when we're going to see the change, not top down from the government over regulation, but consumer driven up.
All right, thank you. Mr. DeWeese.
I agree with my opponent on this, on the waters of the U.S. It is overreaching, and it's hard to understand. And to be a farmer, that would be very difficult understanding where you're at with that law. It's a little silly, in my opinion, as far-reaching as it is.
All right, thank you both. We'll have Mr. DeWeese answer this next one first.
One of the ongoing concerns in state government is the underfunding of the state teachers' pension fund and the state and county employees' pension funds. Mm-hmm. What more should the state do to shore up those retirement systems?
Well, what we have to do is very simple. We're going to have to make the ARC payments, and we're going to have to make the payments into these pension funds. I come from labor, and I'm a part of good contracts and making sure people have good jobs, good wages, pensions, and insurance. And my core value is that if we have a contract with somebody, we should honor it. And we have a contract with these teachers and these government employees, and we need to honor that pension fund that they have. And and these people are older, they're retired, they can't go out and work. And the teachers, they don't have Social Security. But when we get into these budgetary issues, we're going to have to treat it like a kitchen table budget. We're going to have to pay our bills first, and sadly that's where we're at. But that's what we're going to have to do. But I do believe in paying these funds, and I will be committed to doing so as your state representative.
Mr. McCoy.
Thank you. So again, I think there are three things we need to do. Number one, we need to make the payments as they're requested. And so there's a whole process out there where they come to the legislature and say, hey, we need X number of dollars. Apparently for years, that hasn't been happening. They haven't been getting that money. So we have to fund at the requested level. I think number two, to the extent we end up with surpluses, we've got to do a good job of investing those surpluses to start eating away at the debt. And to me, maybe the biggest one here is number three. We've got to get some transparency in this thing. This is public money. This isn't your money. This isn't your private money. These are public funds. And right now, we don't know who's investing them, whether or not it's some legislature's buddy or not. We don't know what kind of rate of return we're getting. We don't know how much they're paying or charging for it. And to me, it's just crazy that some of this information isn't just out and out public. So I think transparency is going to be a huge issue as we look at this pension crisis.
All right, thank you. Mr. DeWeese?
Yeah, I don't need to rebut.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go on to the next question here, and Mr. McCoy will answer first.
Okay.
All Are you in favor of charter schools or something similar to charter schools in Kentucky?
You know, I'm a product of public education, love public education. I'm even a product of Eastern Kentucky public education, which is probably not the best in the state. And when you look at Jefferson County, for example, you know, one of our bigger counties, I think they have 16 of the bottom 30 bad schools. You know, it's amazing. We've got to do something. And to me, charter schools is just another tool in the toolbox. I'm not saying it's going to be the end-all, the cure-all, but I'm also not afraid to look at it. Right now, we've got magnet schools that seem to really just be charter schools, and they're doing very well. The important thing, if we do head to charter schools, if we do try them out, is I want to make sure that it is a locally chartered school. That is, the local school board maintains 100% control, that they're the ones that charter it, they're the ones that keep up with the standards. So as long as we do that, I think it's something that we ought to throw on the table and not just rule out because we're scared of it.
Mr. DeWeese.
I'm against charter schools. I believe that we ought to be putting our eggs into public schools. Public schools work. I am a product of not only a public school but a Jefferson County public school, and that's where I attended. And you know, I think that there are a lot of things that we can do in our public schools. We need to make sure that they're fully funded. We need to put more vocation training in there. But charter schools, when you look at them, they fail. Pure and simple, they fail all across the country. And there are small pockets of successful charter schools, but in general, most of them fail or they have poor performance. They also exclude a lot of people. They exclude folks with children with special needs, special issues, just trying to get that performance number that they have. They spend a lot more money per pupil with less success. So I'm completely against charter schools. I think given our situation right now in this state, we're better off working toward funding our public schools and making them better. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Now we'll go to Randy Patrick to ask this question, and we'll have Mr. DeWeese answer first.
According to reporting in the Lexington Herald-Leader in May, Kentucky ranks 6th worst among the states and the percentage of change to the higher education funding per student since 2008. The amount of state funding provided for each student has dropped 32% and is one of only 3 states to cut funding in the last 2 years. Is it time for Kentucky to reinvest in its college and university system?
Is that for me? Oh, okay, he was looking at Chad there. So, you know, I believe that we need to make higher education more affordable. And, you know, right now our young folks are saddled with debt. And, you know, it's not a working system. These folks are coming out of college into jobs that aren't paying very well from the start. They're struggling with this debt. And, you know, I think that we need to figure out ways to make this more affordable. You know, I've looked at different things that they're proposing as far as the dual credits and things like that, and I would be supportive of that.
Mr. McCoy.
Thank you. I think we should change the way we fund them, and I think the fact of the matter is they're bloated right now, they're inefficient, and I don't understand why we should let them not have to have competition the way all of us have competition. So I'm very much in favor of saying if you're a good school and you're doing a good job, then we're going to fund you. And if you're not a good school and you're not doing a good job, I think you ought to start making some cuts and start getting your house in order. Now, one of the things, though, that it kind of comes in there is I think we've done a horrible job at not giving real information to these poor kids. You're 18 years old, you're going in, you show up at a school and you say, I'm going to major in Russian art history. That's great. You get a $90,000 debt, and what in the world are you going to do with it? So I think we ought to have the government, if the government wants to be helpful here, how about we require some honest economic analysis? Hey kid, look, if you go into this career, your average salary is going to be $27,000. Net present value of that over your lifetime is you're broke. This is not a good career. This is not a good major for you. I'm very much in favor of a lot of more vocational type careers. You know, one of the things I do here in town, I'm the robotics coach for Bethlehem High School, which is crazy because I know nothing about robotics, but these kids are amazing and they can do it. But what I'm seeing is there's an entire industry here. somebody's going to have to fix those robots. Somebody's got to program those robots. Somebody's got to build those robots. And they're here, they're coming, we're getting more and more each day. So I think we ought to get our higher education focused away from all of what they've been focused on, more towards these new technologies, and don't be afraid to make it performance-based.
Okay, we'll have Mr. McCoy answer this next one first.
Okay, this next one is kind of long, so bear with me here.
Okay.
And the question will come at the end. But Kentucky, like many states, has sunshine laws that are supposed to guarantee the public's right to know how their government is operating in order to hold public officials accountable. There have been many high-profile cases where state agencies have resisted releasing records. In one recent instance, the University of Kentucky is suing its school newspaper to withhold documents related to sexual assault investigations on campus. The University of Louisville has sued to appeal an Attorney General's ruling that it must release records related to the investigation into its basketball program. My question, do you feel Kentucky law adequately protects citizens' right to open government? Do you feel those laws need to be updated or enhanced? Or if you prefer, and if you're not familiar with the laws, give us your view on government openness.
So the laws that we have right now are horrible. They way overprotect the government. And so in my business, I sue the government a lot. I've got folks that have died in jail, and I'm suing the jail over the death case. And what they do is they hide behind this shield of, oh, we're still doing an investigation, so we can't give you any documents while there's an investigation pending. What happens is, as soon as the statute of limitations expires and we can't go after them anymore, now all of a sudden the investigation's done, they turn over the documents, and it's absolutely horrible. Kind of goes back to what I talked about with the pension money. Transparency in government is absolutely critical. My dad used to use this phrase all the time, sunshine cures everything, and you referred to them as sunshine laws. There is, except in cases of national security, I really can't think of a reason why the government would hide from the people any information, period. So if we need to make changes to it, I'm all for it. If there's anything we can do to make the government more open and accountable, I'm all for it. It will stop what has been a culture of cronyism in Frankfurt. Absolutely ridiculous the way Frankfurt operates. It's a good old boy system, and that has got to be changed.
Mr. DeWeese.
I support openness in our government. You know, the government is us, we the people, and you know, and this is our government, and we should have access to any records and any transparency. I mean, that's where checks and balances come into play. So I do support transparency. Yes.
All right, thank you both. And we will now move to closing statements. And we will allot 3 minutes on closing statements if you choose to use it all. And for the closing statements, we will have Mr. DeWeese go first.
Thank you. I appreciate it, the opportunity to speak to everyone tonight, and I hope I answered everyone's questions. And if not, feel free to contact me, and we'll go through the issues one-on-one. You know, the thing about me is I'm a leader, and I've been a leader my whole life. And for you, I'll be a leader in Frankfurt and in Nelson County, and work with you, and together we can all solve the problems facing our county and our state. You know, I believe in supporting hardworking families. But the thing is that this election is very important. We are facing a turning point, could be facing a turning point in this state, and that is losing the House. If we lose the House, we're going to lose all of our checks and balances, pure and simple. And you will see Kentucky be just like many of the other states where you see radical agendas imposed. Now, me and my opponent, we do agree on a lot of things that we've talked about here, that we are very different in labor issues that affect people's paycheck, some issues that affect education in terms of charter schools. But this is where our stark difference is, and we're the difference in the future of Nelson County and the future of Kentucky, because frankly, this is going to be a very tight race. It's going to be a tight set of races across the state. But as your state representative, I will work hard to make sure that we have the infrastructure that we need here in Nelson County, that we have the leadership to get things done. You know, in what I do for a living, I negotiate, I find solutions, and I work with others. And as your state representative, that's how I will be for you. So I look forward to seeing everyone November 8th. I hope I can count on your support, and I've earned your vote. And hopefully, with your support, November 9th, I'll be your state representative. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeWeese, and Mr. McCoy, 3 minutes on closing.
Great, thank you. First of all, thank you guys. I appreciate you doing this. Thanks to the public that did show up today, and those of you that are watching at home. It's a great opportunity just to kind of let folks get to meet me. So, you know, the big difference between Democrats and Republicans is really what you kind of got to focus on here. And as a Republican, I truly believe in people. I believe people are capable, they're competent, and will make good decisions. And I believe that at every turn through this, the government that governs the least governs the best. You know, that's an old phrase, but it really has a lot of meaning to me. And you need to compare that to the Democrats. Democrats seem to think that we don't need individual freedom, we don't need individual liberty, that the government is what will help us. The government can make better decisions. And I fundamentally disagree with that principle. Something to think about when you look for a state representative is relationships. And what's very important, you got to remember for Nelson County, and I'm talking to all of Nelson County here, is I would be your representative in Frankfort. So that means I've got to have a good relationship with the folks in Frankfort. Senator Jimmy Higdon and I are very good friends, and he's been a great mentor to me and would continue to be a mentor to me. David Floyd is retiring, but he's still going to be around. He's somebody that I can pick up the phone and call. And he's left behind some really big shoes to fill. But I want to make sure everybody understands something. David has a history or a reputation of being the most accessible state representative, not in Nelson County, in the state. Everywhere I go, that's what I hear. Oh my gosh, I'm going to continue that. My law office is literally a block up the road. You can walk in and talk to me anytime you want. I'm in the phone book. You can call me anytime you want. I'm going to continue with the coffees so that we can all get together during the legislature and after the legislature and talk about your issues. And David always says this, and I think it's a great phrase. When you call me, I'm not going to check the voter rolls. I don't care if you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. I'm there to represent Nelson County. It's our county, and what party you're on is completely irrelevant to me. So I hope that you'll think about those relationships, because that's what's going to be important. That's what's important when it's time to talk about roads, when it's time to talk about budget. And I've got the relationships in Frankfort as well as here in town. Dean Watts parks his truck in front of my office every day. Dean and I talk daily. You know, that's the guy that I got to go to right now to see what does he think's happening in Nelson County and where do we need to be going. So keep that in mind. Thank you for opportunity tonight. I really appreciate it, and I hope I can count on your support on November 8th.
Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Thank you again to the candidates for joining us here tonight for our live debate here on PLG-TV 13. Look for this debate to be archived to our website at plgtv.com, and it will also be replayed this weekend. Stay tuned to PLG for those times. Thanks to the panelists beside me, Kentucky Standard Editor Forrest Berkshire and Kentucky Standard reporter Randy Patrick. A special thanks to our producers John White and Matt Gordon, and also to PLG's Jamie Sizemore and Danielle Hutchins. Daniel Mattingly, that is, sorry. And also a special thanks to Mike Vitito with Bardstown Cable for his awesome work as well. Thanks for joining us tonight. Be sure to join us tomorrow night for 2 debate sessions for the Bardstown City Council, one with 8 candidates at 6 p.m. and the other with 8 candidates at 7:30 p.m., both live from the Nelson County Civic Center. And most importantly, be sure to go out to the polls and vote on Tuesday, November the 8th. I'm Matthew Fogel. Have an excellent evening.